Hey everybody, happy Monday. As always, we will be doing the weekly Q&A where I'll answer questions from all of you, either from coaching calls or just DMs in the community. And let's get started. All right, so first question is around offers. And the question is, do I need to add a description for each role in the resume? So this is very resume specific. And the short answer is yes. And so this would be like for your job, okay, this is my job. There should be basically a short description on there of what the job is. And the reason for that is because what people tend to do is they report their job in the bullets, right? And the bullets are the proof points, right? So if you zoom out on a resume, you have your top section that explains who you are and what you do and the problems that you solve, right? So, okay, here's the problem that I solve. Great, you have my attention. Then we have bullets that sort of are the proof points. This is the value I added by doing X, Y, and Z. I added this value, this value, this value, which all ties back to your unique value proposition, which is at the top of your resume. So those are the two core components. But at the same time, I do want to know what it is that you did, mostly around scope, responsibility. What was your sort of span of control? You can name it many different ways, but the idea is you do want to give me a sense, if I am the hiring manager, of the size of your team, the number of functions, who you supported. So that's why there is typically a short description of the job. But again, it is actually the third most important. The most important is your sort of UVP at the top. The second most important are the bullets in your immediate job, because that's the thing I'm actually judging. I'm not judging you on a job you had 10 years ago. I'm judging you on the job you currently have. And then it's also very helpful to have a short description that gives them the size and the context of the role that you actually had. So again, my 2 cents, but yes, you should have a short description underneath, 2 lines at max, that tells them what the role was before you dive into the meat, which is the proof points. So that's a quick resume tip. Next one is around leads. I'm having trouble building momentum around networking. What should I do? And this is one of those things that when you have to network for a job, like if you are out of a job, there's a lot of motivation to actually go and network because you want a job. So what if you're in a good job, you're just kind of trying to build your network, you should do this stuff. What should you do? And the 2 cents in this case is really around how do you work and setting yourself a goal. So I'm a big fan of make it a 30-day challenge, make it a 2-week challenge, as opposed to I have to network for the rest of my life doing it this way. You want to sort of chunk it down into something that you're willing to do. Right? And within that, I would say two major ways. One is just commitment, time commitment. And again, this works for different people. So some people like, I'm going to put in 30 minutes a day, an hour a day, and just send out notes, talk to people, whatever it is. I'm going to put a time commitment. The other one, which is actually better but potentially harder, is the outcome, right? Which is I want 3 conversations a week, 2 conversations, one or 5 or 10, whatever number it is. And I will work until I get that number, right? So that is a better way, right? And because it also scales up and down. So if you are slow and you're not getting in conversations, you're going to work harder and harder. So that's the downside. On the upside is if you get one relatively easily, then you can stop, right? So short, go for a 30-day or a 2-week challenge to yourself. So you have a time bound and then you can reevaluate. And what that does is it gives your brain an excuse not to be like, oh, this is going to take forever. Why do I have to do this? You're like, no, I'm doing it for 2 weeks. If you can't do 2 weeks, do 1 week. Right? Set a time bound where your brain knows that you're going to pause. Hopefully you'll continue, but at least you have a point that you're going to pause. And then again, either invest in the time commitment, so guarantee that you're going to do it for some amount of time per day per week, or go for outcome, which is again better, but requires a bit more sort of self-discipline, which is I want a certain number of conversations, a certain number of connections, and I will stop when I hit that number of connections. Right, so that's kind of a quick framework for how to move forward when you are kind of stalled on your networking. All right. Similarly, in the leads category, next question is, do you have any thoughts about an opportunity to work at a company that is owned by private equity? And this actually comes up in the tech world, a decent amount, right? Not everybody works for PE firms, but it comes up enough that I actually get this question, a few times a quarter, I'd say. And the short, if you've never done it, it is a specific culture, right? And, in general, the macro tone is it's all about the money, right? A private equity firm buys a company with the idea that they're going to sell it in a few years for a multiple of whatever they paid for it. And the only way to do that is to sort of goose revenue, goose margins. So it's all about the money, right? And so you have to understand that and have that align with what you want to do, right? Some people, that's fine. Some people, that's what they want. And some people, well, I want to be mission driven. I don't want to be the focus of the company just to make money. So if you're a mission driven person, private equity is probably not going to be a great space for you. But again, for a couple of years, for a couple of rounds, it may very well be. But that's the macro thing, is it is focused on getting the private equity firm their exit, which means they want the revenue, they want the margin so that they can justify the sale to whoever the next is, or the IPO, whatever they're trying to do. Okay. So what about the day-to-day job? Again, there are two halves. I mean, I'm simplifying the world, just hopefully this is helpful, right? So there are two major stages of private equity, right? One is streamlining, right, which is get rid of everything that's unnecessary, streamline operations, cut, 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 cut. Here, there are two positions to be. One is in the group that's being cut, 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 not good. So you don't want to do that, right? You don't want to go there if you are part of the group that's going to be cut. The second place is part of the group that's going to do the cutting, right? Which is an effective job, can make things more efficient, can be a little depressing depending on what style you like to work, because your job is to simplify this operation, which means you're gonna have to let people go and things like that. So again, those are the two. Don't be here. I mean, it's okay. It all depends on how you feel about the fact that you're going to be basically streamlining operations. So that's the one half. The positive half is the other one, right? Which is now it's about growth, right? So once they kind of streamline, then they're trying to juice whatever their core business is. So again, that they can get their multiple whenever they exit. And so if you're part of that growth, the positive part of that is, again, they're so focused on the money that bureaucracy and all that kind of stuff tends to fall away. So if you've been in a company, let's say that's going to get bought by PE, and you like the core product, you like what it does, but it's just become slow and bloated and all that kind of stuff, there can actually be a good scenario because the PE firm will come in, they'll clean out all the bloat, and then they're going to focus on the growth. So if you are kind of constrained by bureaucracy, or that's kind of the turnaround, then there actually is a potential positive scenario because suddenly you'll be able to do a lot more as long as you're aligned to the mission, which in this case is making money. Right. So it's a complicated decision. Obviously, there's no right answer. It all depends on you and what you want, which is why, if we have that leads course in the community, like the first thing is, what do you want? Right. That's always where I suggest you start, so you know what you want. And then you can compare against the PE scenario and see if that fits. Okay, the last thing on the PE thing is, again, it's not necessarily for a lifetime. So you want to say, for the next 2 to 3 years, for my next chunk of my career, is this worth doing? And then you validate against the things I just outlined. So again, PE can work out very, very well, or not so well, depending on how good a fit it is. All right, two more questions for today. So the next one, sales, like, what should I ask in an interview? So this is where you're kind of in the deep interviews. It's your turn, or sometimes they do this early on. It's your turn to ask questions, right? What should I ask? And my favorite question, which you may have heard me talk about before, is this idea of, okay, so if you were hiring me, what would success look like in the first 90 days? Right? That is my favorite question because it does a number of things that are very positive. So one, if you were to hire me, creates a scenario in the hiring manager's role that, like, okay, well, let me imagine that I hired you just from a persuasion technique. That's a good thing because now I'm thinking about you in the role. What would success look like? And now I'm going to tell you the most important things that I need to be working, right? Because in 90 days is not that long. So I'm going to ask you to solve the problems that are most pressing on my mind for this role. And so if I do that, you then find out, like, what is top of mind for me, which means that you can talk about that thing. And if you're like, oh, I didn't talk about that at all, right? So if they, what are the first 90 days? Well, the first thing we need to do is fix the relationship with product. Let's say you're in technology, like product. It's not a good relationship. I would need you to really get the head of product on board and do X, Y, and Z. And if you then say, oops, either I didn't talk about relationships, now's your chance. Oh, that's so great to hear. We didn't get a chance to talk about relationship building, but that is one of my core strengths. And you give a quick, sort of story about why you can solve that problem if you missed it before, or if you did talk about it, you can then connect back. Oh, that's great, because that was one of those things I mentioned earlier. That's part of the special thing that I bring, and blah blah blah. Right. But that's probably my favorite question is, what would success look like in the first 90 days? Because you get so much information out of it. Okay. And then last question for today is around executive presence. So how should I approach a steering committee update if I want to be seen as an executive? So this would be, I'm assuming a steering committee of senior executives, and you're going to present. Um, this is a specific example of the general principle, which is you want to move from service provider to peer. And so what that means is most of the relationships are service provider. There's an executive, they need something, you are there to do that thing, and you are providing a service. And so if you're going with a status update, that is a service. If I'm the senior executive, hey, what's going on with that project? I'm going to call you. I need you to give me an update. You give me an update. I now know what's going on. You have provided a service to me, right? There's nothing wrong with that. That's the typical way people engage. But if you want to grow your career, your job is to become a peer. A peer is somebody that I talk to about the issues. You're not an information source. You're a partner for me to sort of bounce ideas, strategize, and figure out what should we do, right? So that is your goal, is to try to get that kind of conversation. So rather than just sort of here's the status, A, B, C, D, E. You want to throw in there sort of discussion points that you can hopefully jump in. So here's the three options, right? Here's my recommendation, but I'd really love to hear what the steering committee thinks about in terms of A versus B versus C, right? So you want to kind of create that conversation. The other trick that's very helpful is go talk to some of them beforehand and give them a preview of the question that you're going to be asking. Say, oh, here's the three options. I was kind of thinking A, but I'd love to get your take. You can definitely do your boss. You can do some other executives. So get one or two or three people's opinions beforehand, because then what you can do in the meeting is go in and say, hey, okay, update, blah, blah, blah. Here is the three options I had. I was thinking A originally, but I talked to Sue, I talked to Dan, I talked to whoever, and these are people on the committee, and they pointed out that this was another option. And so I'd love to get just a discussion, quick discussion to see what do everybody else think, right? And what you've done there is you've demonstrated that one, you're creating a business value conversation. It's not a one-way information flow. It is a conversation around what's the best thing to do. Two, you've demonstrated that you have a network because you talk to two or three of the executives on the steering committee. So the other executives will be like, wow, okay, he must know these people. Therefore, he's more in the room than just this random person who came in to give a status report, right? So that's your goal. Again, your goal is always to get to a peer level kind of conversation with it. So it's sometimes hard to do in a steering committee, but that's the idea, is you want to have a not one-way information flow. You want to ask a couple of questions that will get some dialogue, and ideally use that to kind of build relationships. Because the other thing you can do is afterwards, if somebody didn't give one, or somebody said something interesting, you then follow up with them one-on-one and say, oh, you mentioned this in the steering committee meeting. I'd love to just kind of clarify what you mean, and I have a few thoughts about that. Do you have 15 minutes? Right, and now you can start to build that relationship. And so you're chaining all this stuff together. That's the idea. So again, executive presence is all about moving from a service provider, somebody who just does what is asked of them, to a peer who's actively contributing. So there you go. So those are the questions for this week. As always, if you have others, just send me a DM, drop it under this post, and we will do it again next week. All right. See you in the community. Take care.